In this video we're making a macrame style crystal pendant with an interchangeable design. So we can swap out the crystal that sits in the net there. We made the necklace parts of our design into a 4-strand round braid. If you want to swap your crystal out, you just slide the little bead up, take your crystal out and then place a similar size crystal into the net and slide that bead back down to hold your crystal secure. Our crystals that we're using today are about 5 centimeters long and about 3.5 to 4 centimeters wide. You do want similar size crystals so that you can make a net that's going to fit them all okay and they're not going to fall out the bottom. For our design today we're using 0.8mm polyester cotton thread, and we also need a bead that has a large hole. Now for our threads we need 4 48-inch lengths. So I start by cutting them and placing the ends together. And then we place both ends of the cords together and follow it back down to find the middle. And then in the middle here we're going to place a simple overhand knot, bringing your threads around and then through the loop, pulling it nice and tight. Now we're going to start to make our macrame knots for our netting. So to start with, just holding it there on that center knot, we want to bring one thread from each side together and tie a simple overhand knot. So just leaving a little space about 1 centimeter away from that center knot, and then pulling that little overhand knot down nice and tight. Now on the other side of the knot we're going to do the same thing, so bring one cord out from each side and tie an identical knot on this side as well. Another simple overhand knot around itself and then pulling the tail through the loop, pulling it tight so that it looks nice and even with the opposite knot, and it's the same distance away from that center knot. Now we want to tie 2 more knots on these last threads, so we've got 4 even knots the whole way around. So one here and one here. Now with our cross shape you should have 2 threads coming out of each knot, and so we grab 2 threads sitting next to each other and hold that center knot just for tension. Then we tie these 2 threads in a simple overhand knot about the same distance away as the other knots were. Pulling that knot down nice and tight. And then we're going to work our way around, grabbing 1 thread out of each side, sitting next to each other, holding onto that center knot for tension and tying a simple overhand knot on those 2 threads. And pulling that knot down so it's an even distance with the other knots. Now it can seem a little overwhelming because you've got so many threads, but it's really quite simple. So if you do get into trouble, just lay it out on the table again and see where you're at. So you can see here I just need to tie 2 more knots, 1 on each side with both of these threads here, and this is going to finish off this second layer of knots. So again, just holding that center knot, keeping the tension on there so all my knots can sit evenly, and tying that simple overhand knot. Now I've just got this last knot to tie on this layer. So holding that center knot and tying the 4th knot. Now you should be able to start to see your macrame net taking shape. So it's quite simple. We're just going to continue the same technique, tying knots in 2 threads that are sitting next to each other, making sure your knots are all evenly spaced and there's no holes that are big enough that your crystal can fit through and fall out. You can also check your netting on your crystal and make sure it's fitting okay. You can always untie and retie knots if you need to, so you want to check that there's no holes that your crystal can fall out of. You can also keep checking how many knots you need to tie until you get to the top of your crystal. So just continue tying your knots by bringing 2 threads next to each other together, holding on to that center knot to keep them the same distance apart, and working your way around so that you've got 4 knots on each layer. Making sure to keep those knots the same distance apart. And then you can check the size of your netting on your crystal after each layer of knots. So this is my net after 3 layers of knots. You can see I'm just over halfway along my crystal, so I need some more knots. I'll put 1 more layer on. And this is after the 4th layer of knots. You can see now my knots are coming up really close to the top of the crystal. They're holding it nice and secure. I could do 1 more knot there, but I think it would look a bit bulky on the top. It's a little bit tricky to advise as it does depend on the size of your crystals. Some nets do need more knots than others, and you do want the last layer of knots to finish near the top. Then we're going to make the straps for the necklace part of our design. So we're going to join the 4 threads on one side together and the 4 threads on the other side together to make 2 nice round braids for our necklace. So to start the cords, you want to separate them into 2. So you've got 4 cords on each side, and we're going to work on just one side at a time. So holding on to that center knot and pulling these cords down so that those 2 knots sit nice and even with these cords coming down, and then I just clip it onto my jig. Now we're going to make both sides of our necklace strands into a 4-strand round braid. So starting with the far right cord, we take that under 2 cords and back over 1. Then it's the far left cord, taking that under 2 cords and back over 1 cord. Then the right cord, under 2 cords and back over 1 cord. Then the left cord, under 2 cords and back over 1 cord. I do have a quick video on 4-strand round braids and I'll link that below. So you just alternate these right and left stitches until you've gone the full length of your braid. Then we're going to pop our bead on and do the other side as well. Once you've braided down your whole cord, then you want to place your bead with the larger hole on and tie a simple knot on the end, something that will just hold that braid nice and secure while you do the other one. Now we can swap onto the other side of cords, making sure we're pulling them down even, and then we can start our 4-strand round braid on this side as well. Doing the same technique, right strand under 2 and then back over 1. And left strand under 2 and back over 1. Alternating those right and left stitches until you get to the end. Once you're at the end, then you want to slide all your strands up under the bead as well. Sliding that bead down, and then holding on to that center knot, you can pull your straps out so they're sitting nice and evenly off that knot. And I just take that knot off the first strand, and then we can tie these 2 strands together, making sure the length is even off that center knot, and then tying a simple overhand knot at the end. Pulling it nice and tight and making sure all the threads are tight too and there's no slack. To place your crystal in, you just slide your bead up a little bit, and then you can kind of gently open the net and place your crystal inside, and then slide your bead back down towards the crystal to keep it secure. If you're happy with it, then you can cut your tails off just outside the knot and singe them with a lighter so they don't fray. So you should have a beautiful little crystal pendant with a 4-strand round braid. Obviously swapping that crystal out is nice and easy as well. You just slide that bead up and take your crystal out, placing the new one in and bringing that bead back down.